At the gates of a solemn military funeral, an elderly veteran in a faded uniform clutched a single wilted flower, only to be stopped cold by guards who didn't know his name. But when the four-star general himself stepped out of the ceremony to salute him, the crowd fell silent, realizing this unassuming old man carried a story that changed the course of a hero's life. The sun hung low over Arlington National Cemetery, casting long shadows across the rows of white headstones. A crowd had gathered, a sea of black suits and dress uniforms, to honor General William "Bill" Hargrove, a four-star general whose career had spanned decades and conflicts. His funeral was a tightly controlled affair, with security personnel stationed at every entrance, checking names against a meticulously curated guest list. The air was heavy with the weight of protocol, the kind of precision that defined military life. But beyond the gates, one man stood apart, unnoticed by most. His presence a quiet challenge to the day's formality. His name was Samuel Carter, an 87-year-old veteran whose weathered face bore the lines of a life spent in service. His uniform, a relic from the Korean War era, was faded, the olive-drab fabric frayed at the cuffs. In his trembling hand, he held a single white rose, its petals drooping as if mirroring his own weariness. Samuel had arrived early, walking slowly with the aid of a cane, his steps deliberate but unsteady. He had no invitation, no official place among the dignitaries and family members inside. Yet, he had come with a purpose, driven by a promise made long ago. The guards at the gate were young, their faces stern as they scanned their clipboards. When Samuel approached, his military ID clutched in his free hand, they barely looked up. "Name?" one of them asked, his tone clipped. "Samuel Carter," he replied, his voice low but steady. "I'm here for General Hargrove's funeral." The guard flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. "You're not on the list, sir. I'm sorry, but you can't enter." Samuel's expression didn't change, though his grip on the rose tightened. "I served with Bill Hargrove," he said simply. "I just want to pay my respects." The second guard, a sergeant with a buzz cut and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward. "Sir, this is a private ceremony. Only authorized personnel and invited guests are allowed. You'll have to step back." Samuel didn't move. He stood there, his eyes fixed on the gate, as if he could see through it to the ceremony unfolding beyond. The guards exchanged a glance, their patience thinning. To them, he was just an old man, perhaps confused, perhaps stubborn, clinging to a past that no one else remembered. But Samuel wasn't confused. He knew exactly why he was there. Inside the cemetery, the service was underway. Rows of chairs were filled with military officers, politicians, and family members, all gathered around the flag-draped casket. A chaplain spoke in measured tones, recounting General Hargrove's distinguished career, his leadership in Vietnam, his strategic brilliance in the Gulf War, his mentorship of countless soldiers who rose through the ranks under his guidance. The general had been a towering figure, a man whose name was synonymous with duty and honor. But as the chaplain spoke, one man in the front row seemed distracted. General Thomas Ellison, a four-star general and Hargrove's longtime friend, sat with his hands clasped tightly in his lap. His dress uniform was immaculate, the stars on his shoulders gleaming under the late afternoon sun. But his mind wasn't on the eulogy. It was on a conversation he'd had with Hargrove years ago, one that had stayed with him through every promotion, every deployment, every sleepless night. Hargrove had spoken of a young private in Korea, a man who had saved his life in a moment of chaos, a man whose name Ellison had never forgotten, Samuel Carter. Ellison's eyes drifted toward the gate, where he could just make out a small commotion. He saw the guards gesturing, their voices raised slightly, and an elderly man standing his ground. Something stirred in Ellison's chest, a suspicion he couldn't shake. He leaned toward an aide seated beside him. "Who's that at the gate?" he asked quietly. The aide glanced over, squinting. "Some old veteran, sir. Says he knew General Hargrove. He's not on the list, so they're turning him away." Ellison's jaw tightened. He stood abruptly, drawing curious glances from those around him. Without a word, he began walking toward the gate, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. The crowd murmured, unsure of what was happening. The chaplain paused mid-sentence, his voice trailing off as he watched the general move with purpose. Samuel, meanwhile, was still standing his ground. "I don't need to sit with the others," he told the guards, his voice calm but firm. "I just want to lay this flower on his grave. I owe him that much." The sergeant shook his head. "Sir, I understand, but rules are rules. You need to leave, or we'll have to escort you off the premises." Samuel's eyes, clouded with age but sharp with resolve, met the sergeant's. "I've been through worse than being escorted away, son. I fought in Korea. I carried men out of foxholes. I'm not leaving until I've done what I came to do." The first guard sighed, reaching for his radio. "We've got a situation at the East Gate," he began, but before he could finish, a shadow fell over them. General Ellison stood there, his presence commanding silence. The guards snapped to attention, saluting crisply. "At ease," Ellison said, his voice low but authoritative. His gaze shifted to Samuel, and for a moment the two men locked eyes. Ellison took in the faded uniform, the white rose, the stooped posture of a man who had carried the weight of war for decades. "Your name, sir?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Samuel Carter," the old man replied. The name hit Ellison like a bullet. He stepped closer, his voice softening. "Private First Class Samuel Carter, 7th Infantry Division, Korea." Samuel's eyes widened slightly, surprised that anyone would know his rank after all these years. He nodded. "That's me." Ellison's expression softened, a rare crack in his military bearing. He turned to the guards. "This man is my guest. He's coming in." The guards hesitated, caught off guard. "Sir, he's not on the list." "I said he's my guest," Ellison repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Open the gate." The sergeant nodded quickly, stepping aside as the gate swung open. Samuel didn't move at first, his eyes searching Ellison's face for an explanation. Ellison gestured toward the ceremony. "Come with me, Mr. Carter. You belong here." As they walked toward the gravesite, the crowd watched in hushed curiosity. Samuel's slow, deliberate steps contrasted with Ellison's measured stride, but the general matched his pace, ensuring the old man didn't feel rushed. Whispers rippled through the attendees. Who was this man? Why was General Ellison escorting him personally? The answers would come soon enough. When they reached the casket, Ellison guided Samuel to a spot near the front, ignoring the surprised looks from the dignitaries. The chaplain resumed his eulogy, but Ellison raised a hand, signaling for a pause. All eyes were on him now, and he turned to face the crowd, his voice carrying across the silent cemetery. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "before we continue, I need to tell you about the man standing beside me. This is Samuel Carter, a veteran of the Korean War, a man who served with General Hargrove in 1952. What you may not know, what I didn't know until Bill told me himself, is that Samuel Carter is the reason General Hargrove lived long enough to become the man we're honoring today." A murmur ran through the crowd, and Samuel shifted uncomfortably, unaccustomed to attention. Ellison continued, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "In the winter of 1952, during a firefight near the 38th parallel, a young Lieutenant Hargrove was pinned down by enemy fire. His platoon was ambushed, and he was wounded, unable to move. Private Carter, against orders, ran through a hail of bullets to drag him to safety. He carried Hargrove over his shoulder for half a mile, through snow and mud, until they reached a field hospital. That act of courage saved Bill Hargrove's life." The crowd was silent now, hanging on Ellison's every word. Samuel stared at the ground, his hand trembling around the rose. He hadn't come here for recognition. He'd come to say goodbye. "Bill never forgot what Samuel did," Ellison said. He told me that story more times than I can count. He said it was the moment he learned what it meant to lead. Not just to give orders, but to inspire men to risk everything for one another. Samuel Carter didn't just save a man's life that day. He shaped a general's legacy. Ellison turned to Samuel, his eyes glistening. "Mr. Carter, I know you came here to honor Bill. But today we honor you." With that, he raised his hand in a crisp salute, holding it steady as the crowd watched in stunned silence. One by one, other officers followed suit, their salutes a ripple of respect that spread through the ranks. The civilians stood, some placing hands over their hearts, others wiping tears from their eyes. Samuel, overwhelmed, returned the salute with a shaky hand. He stepped forward, his cane tapping softly against the ground, and placed the white rose on Hargrove's casket. "Rest easy, Bill," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I kept my promise." The ceremony resumed, but the mood had shifted. The focus was no longer solely on General